Middle of a spirited and lengthy debate on the Save America Act. It's a piece of common sense legislation that we think is overwhelmingly supported by the American people, and we intend to keep pushing forward and ensure that the American people know whether their senators are for or against ensuring that only American citizens vote in American elections. You've probably heard some falsehoods coming out of the Democrats throughout the course of the week. Probably paramount among those was when Leader Schumer answered a question and said, well, we're not really opposed to photo ID. That was quickly dispelled when we had an opportunity to vote or to respond to a proposal put forward by the senator from Ohio, Senator Husted, that would have passed essentially photo ID only, limited it to that one issue. And the Democrats not only blocked it, but their counterproposal was a piece of legislation that would actually specifically ban photo ID nationwide. So they're not serious about this issue, but they are clearly on the wrong side of the American people. So as we press forward in this debate, we look forward to continue to highlight the differences of opinion we have between our colleagues on the Democrat side of the aisle, but to ensure that the American people fully know who is and who is not for ensuring that only American citizens vote in our elections in this country. That's what this debate is all about. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. Really nothing more, nothing less. But that's the end of the day. That's the vote. That's the question Democrats here in the Senate are going to have to answer, and we intend to make them do that. Senator Barrasso.
10 million illegal immigrants flooded into this country while Joe Biden was president and the Democrats were in charge of the Senate. And now Democrats want to make it easier for them to have an influence in our elections in the United States. I believe only citizens of this country ought to vote in American elections, and I believe you need to show and prove you are who you say you are with a photo ID in order to vote. It's common sense. You have to show a photo ID to board a plane, to buy a beer. Why not to vote? It's overwhelmingly popular with the American people. They agree you need to show a photo ID in order to vote. You know, the Save America Act that we're talking about here and have been through the week on the floor of the United States Senate, it is the only way that we can make sure we have safe and secure elections that reflect the viewpoints of the American people. But what the Democrats are doing, they are standing with the extreme minority who say you shouldn't have to show a photo ID. They're also standing with the extreme minority that don't believe we need a Department of Homeland Security because they continue to vote to keep it closed. Every one of them is now on the record. The Democrats in the United States Senate are standing on the side of open borders and illegal voters. Senator Langford.
So this is the challenge that we face today. We have Department of Homeland Security closed right now because apparently my Democratic colleagues are more afraid of ICE than they are of Iran. And the challenges that we face now in the conflict internationally, that we know that we have threats back in the homeland, but my Democratic colleagues in the Senate just refuse to even pay attention to that at all. Stacked on top of that is the issue we've been talking about for weeks, and we're still working through this weekend to be able to negotiate, and that is the most basic thing in American life, voting. The 1965 Voting Rights Act begins with all citizens. This should not be controversial. It is already federal law that requires only citizens vote in the United States. We trust that they sign up as only citizens, but we're not verifying, except in a few states. About 9 states actually do verification of citizenship all over the country. And you know what? They still have people show up to vote. 36 states require voter ID to be able to show up to vote, including my own state. My own state requires voter ID whether you do mail-in voting or in-person voting. You have to have voter ID in that. This is not complicated. This is simple and straightforward. It's not even controversial except in Washington, D.C. Across the country, if you were to ask anyone, should you show an ID to be able to vote? They would say, well, yeah, that shouldn't be a problem on that. Should you ask the simple question, should only American citizens vote? And they would say, of course that should be so. But for some reason, that's controversial among Democrats in Washington, D.C. This is simple. This is straightforward. It's why we continue to be able to push this common sense legislation that the American people want to see get done.
If you attend a John Ossoff rally in Georgia, he requires an ID to get into his rally. But he will not, along with every other Democrat, support having an ID to vote. Overwhelming majorities in South Carolina and Georgia support having an ID to vote. Actually, what we hear from the Democrats is a throwback to old years when they talk about race in Jim Crow 2.0. The truth is that over 80% of Hispanics agree with an ID to vote. 75% plus African Americans agree with an ID to vote. The one thing this is not is about separating people. This is about making it easier to vote and harder to cheat. Let's get it done for the American people.
Well, in addition to serving Ohio as one of its U.S. senators, for 2 terms I served as Secretary of State in our great state. I oversaw 2 presidential elections, 2 gubernatorial elections, and we indeed in Ohio made it easy to vote and hard to cheat. And I was listening to the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, the other day say that he didn't oppose photo ID as part of the Save America Act. That's not what they opposed. So I listened closely and I said, okay, well, we can fix that. I offered the other night a clean photo ID bill that would allow 5 forms of identification, photo identification, to cast a ballot and to create a national standard that 36 other states already have that would say you could use a driver's license, a state ID, a military ID, a tribal ID, or a passport. Things that are widely available and in the state of Ohio are free to get a state ID to cast your ballot. This indeed would enshrine a national standard that would provide election integrity to our nation. And I offered that clean legislation, and the Democrats blocked it. And they came up with all kinds of excuses as to why, but there are no good excuses. This works. It's being implemented all around the country, photo ID. It will provide for integrity in our elections. And I also want to add about making sure that citizens only vote. I think that everyone can also agree with that. But understand the way it works right now, many times there are millions of people who are in this country who are here legally under TPS, under refugee status, with a visa or a green card, who also have the same information, a social security number, that would allow them to register to vote. And I can tell you from somebody who was from a swing state that you have groups of people all over this country who come in, descend, and try to sign up people through voter registration drives, and are often signing people up, maybe even without their recognition of it, that they're committing a crime by signing up people to vote who are not legally allowed to be in this country, or not legally allowed to vote in this country. And if you care about them, you wouldn't want that to happen, because immediately, as soon as they do it, they are committing a crime and jeopardizing their status to ever become a citizen or to stay in this nation. And so I ask my Democrat friends, I've been listening to you. I want to find common ground on a photo ID bill that you can support. We offered one. I hope you will reconsider and support us in this. And I want to thank the Majority Leader, John Thune, for giving us a chance to push this forward to get photo ID done in this country.
Well, as the 6th speaker, I don't want to be too repetitive, but I will be, because these are, everybody has spoken to the reasons why voter ID and proof of citizenship is a requirement in some states and should be all across the nation. But it goes back to one thing that I think most of the folks that we represent have a great respect for, and that's just basic common sense. Common sense and fairness. It's only fair that those who have the right to vote as a citizen are actually granted that and can go to the polls. It's only common sense that an ID would be required. So I'm kind of flashing back to when we were requiring the real ID. And we know we live in the land of exaggeration here in Washington, D.C., but there were, people, this is discriminatory. People aren't going to be able to get a real ID. They're not going to be able to fly. It's going to be so terrible. Guess what? People have real IDs and fly every single day. States have adjusted. They've put the mechanisms in place for the real ID to be used at TSA. That's the same thing that we're looking at here. And as John said, as former Secretary of State, states can make these adjustments and in many cases already have. So let's go back to common sense and fairness, and let's make sure our elections are secure.
Questions?
Good
Morning.
We've been told repeatedly that you plan to terminate debate at some point. Why, considering the pressure of the president and the right, why would you eventually move to end debate on this if this is so important, especially to the president?
Yeah, well, we haven't made any final decisions about how to conclude this, Chad. Well, at some point, that's a possibility. But at the moment, what we are trying to do is ensure that we are having a fulsome debate on an issue that is overwhelmingly supported by the American people, and one that puts everybody on the record, one way or the other. And so today, obviously, we're going to have a vote later this afternoon on whether or not biological males ought to be able to vote or ought to be able to compete and play in women's sports. But then we will move to something that Senator Husted addressed, and that was the piece of legislation he tried to get brought up and passed on the floor and objected to by the Democrats the other night. And we will move to that, put that, every Democrat on the record. So the photo ID amendment will be the next amendment. And I think all these things in the Save America Act, as we've all said, are common sense. We think they're supported by overwhelming majority of Americans. And in many cases, as Senator Husted also pointed out, you had 36 states that have adopted photo ID laws. Why wouldn't we have a nationwide one? And to hear the Democrats, hear the leader of the Democrats say in response to a question, we're not opposed to photo ID, but then to block even getting it up and considering it, and furthermore to offer an alternative that bans and prohibits specifically photo ID, I think speaks to where they are. But they're all going to have to cast that vote. So we're going to continue to debate this, and at some point we'll decide after we have a sufficient number of votes and we have had the opportunity to have that fulsome debate on the floor. We'll decide what to do next. Lisa.
Two questions about specific pushback on the bill that include Senator Murkowski's her pushbacks. One is that it's effective immediately. The Real ID card, for example, was phased in ultimately over 20 years. So it's a lot of owners you're putting on states to move around very quickly. And then the other is about rural areas, and the question of there's some kind of murkiness, I think, in the way this is written as to whether people would have to travel for proof of citizenship specifically to bring their documents, and that might be a real burden on states like Alaska.
Well, and I think you heard her talk, and that might be a question for Senator Husted to take too, as a former Secretary of State. But as the bill was being drafted, the attempt was to contemplate all the different scenarios that might play out in different states around the country, because states do have different laws and obviously have different geography. But I think in the end, the language that was agreed upon and adopted, I think addressed most of those concerns. And if there are other concerns out there, obviously there are conversations going on with Senator Murkowski. You mentioned Alaska. Alaska has some unique circumstances which we're trying to make sure are addressed. But there isn't any reason why any of those would get in the way of adopting a photo ID. I mean, you're talking about other issues with regard to registration. There's some questions about mail-in ballots. But when it comes to photo ID, that is a straightforward issue, and that ought to be an up and down vote that every Republican and Democrat in the United States Senate can cast that reflects an overwhelming majority of where their constituents are. And I don't know if anything you want to add to that, John?
I would just say that 36 states already do photo ID. Some form of identification. And I listened to what Senator Murkowski said the other night, and I believe that our straightforward bill on photo ID addresses her concerns that this can easily be implemented. So I know there are a lot of issues in the Save America Act, but this particular one focused on photo ID is something that can be easily implemented, which is already being implemented around the country.
All right, a couple more.
All this is to say that today we are seeing a vote on trans sports issues. So other than the president wanting this to be in the bill, why wedge this in here? And Senator Husted, if I can, you talked about TPS. How many on record have you ever come across that have been voting that are TPS recipients? How many examples are there of that?
Well, on the issue with respect to biological males competing in women's sports and transgender surgeries for minors, those are also issues that are overwhelmingly supported by the American people, and issues on which there is legislation up here, broad support among certainly our caucus on both of those issues, and so yeah, they're part of a package, a broader package of the Save America Act. And obviously we intend to trigger votes on those. But the specific issue we're addressing right now is photo ID. And that is one on which the Democrats have said, Senator Schumer himself, that we are not opposed to photo ID. Well, let's test that proposition. Let's actually have a vote on it and see where the Democrats are. Because like I said, I think everybody here in all of our states, this is something that's overwhelmingly supported by a majority of voters. And the fact that 36 states have already implemented, I think, reflects that. You want to touch that one?
Yeah, I can just answer. My point that I was making is that there are many ways that you can be in this country legally, have the documents that allow you to register to vote, and because there are so many groups out there who are trying to sign people up, inadvertently, even if you don't want to do this nefariously, you're having people who are signing you up to vote. You're attesting that you're an American citizen when you do that, and then you're putting your immigration status in jeopardy. So out of concern for that group, those groups of people, we ought to want to make sure that we don't have flaws in our voter registration system so that those unfortunate circumstances don't materialize.
Let me just make a quick comment. Let me give you a practical example in Oklahoma. In Oklahoma, we passed a law a couple of years ago saying if you show up at jury duty and attest to the judge that, hey, I'm not eligible for jury duty because I'm not an American citizen. We passed a law several years ago saying as soon as somebody does that, we also go check your voter registration to see if you're registered to vote. The first time that we did that, there were 40 people that were identified before a judge that they had attested, I'm not here legally. We did the first blush. 40 people immediately had already been registered to vote. So we can't say what the total number is. I can't say those are TPS or not. But most certainly this happens. There's this belief that somehow this is not really happening for real. Even in my state, in Oklahoma, this is happening, and we found ways to be able to identify it and to be able to address it. This should be all citizens. That's what it should be.
All right, last question.
Last night, Collins and several Republicans again met with Democrats. They said they may even offer legislative text. Have you heard back from Dems yet on them accepting the DHS proposal or counter offering? And further, do you expect that meeting to again convene tonight?
I would hope that the discussions continue. I think the meeting last night was productive, and the offer was made and legislative language was submitted by the administration to open up the Department of Homeland Security with a lot of reforms that had been requested and asked for by Democrats. And at some point, the Democrats are going to have to take yes for an answer. I know they think this is politically good for them. It's not. It's not politically good for anybody to have literally tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people out of work and important functions of our government not being carried out on a daily basis, and functions that are important to our homeland security and our national security. So the opportunity to actually drive this to a conclusion is there. You have to have, obviously, to negotiate a deal, you got to have two sides at the table. The White House is there, Senate Republicans are there. The question is, are Senate Democrats going to take yes for an answer? And frankly, at some point it's going to become pretty clear to everybody that they really don't have any excuses. Frankly, it was shameful that they waited 18 days to even respond to a White House offer. And so the White House has been meticulously trying to do outreach, set up these meetings. They finally agreed to it a couple of days ago, which led to a follow-up meeting last night, and it should lead up to a follow-up meeting over this weekend. It's going to be very, very hard to explain if we leave town this next week without having funded the Department of Homeland Security. And at some point, the Democrats are going to be held accountable for this. I know they think it's, as has been described by one of their leaders, very serene with their position. Well, I'm telling you something, the people who are sitting in those lines at the airports right now don't see it as very serene. This needs to be resolved We need a result. We need a result that opens up the Department of Homeland Security, and that's going to require Democrats to, at some point, accept yes for an answer. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.